A new baby is most times a source of joy to every family it is born to. It is not unusual in this part of the world for a new mother to ask for advice from their relatives, older relatives, from their mothers, and even from Google. But a lot of times you find that some of the advice that they get is unsolicited and quite confusing because, as we know, every child is different and what worked for one mother may not necessarily work for another mother. So therefore, I'll be discussing some of the tips for avoiding this unsolicited advice which a new mom may get. Some of this advice may come from a very good place. Most of these persons believe that they are trying to help or to do you a favor. But despite this, you find that a lot of times you're frustrated from hearing these things, or you feel like a bad parent when people say some of these things to you. Imagine being told that you are a bad parent, that you're not feeding your child enough, or your child is skinny, your child is not gaining enough weight. That's more than enough to frustrate any mother or any parent when they hear it. In a lot of cases, these advice and Noamagbe's might even tell you that they are better parents than you are. We've all been there. So therefore, here are some tips for handling unsolicited advice and for doing what works best for you and for your baby. The first tip is to stay calm. Remember that these persons are genuinely feel like they're trying to help you. So not attacking them and listening to them ensures that you retain your relationships, retain your sanity, and that you can calmly listen to what they are saying with an open mind. The next tip is to educate yourself. It doesn't hurt to research about some of the topics that they are giving you this advice about. It ensures that you are armed with information and that you know what you're talking about. So a lot of persons, when they find out that you know what you're talking about on that subject, they quickly abandon the subject and leave you alone. So that's a good way. That's one good tip to avoid unsolicited advice. The next tip is to pick your battle. Not every argument is worth pursuing, so it is up to you to decide to either politely thank them, smile, and make the decision that you decide, or make the decision you feel is best for you. It's really up to you at the end of the day. Some people will question everything that you do, from the decision to breastfeed, how to breastfeed, the type of birth that you decide on, whether it's a cesarean section or a vaginal delivery. Some people will genuinely poke and talk and critique and make you look like you do not know what you're doing. So it sometimes is not worth the effort going through the arguments and fighting. Sometimes you can decide to fight, to get into the argument and to win the battle for you and your baby. On some other times you can decide that this is not worth it, At the end of the day, it's really up to you. Remind these persons that times have changed. What worked in the era of my grandma is not necessarily what works now, and every child is different. Even for a doctor like myself, when I had my babies, or when I had each of my babies, I still got this unsolicited advice. There were still persons that were telling me that I had to sit on buckets of very hot water. There were still persons telling me that I had to use things like gripe water. There were still persons telling me all sorts of things that did not make sense, even till date. But you find that in a lot of cases, when I politely assert and remind them that I know what I'm talking about, sometimes they leave me alone, and sometimes I decide that I will not necessarily reply this person and I let it be. So pick your battle. That tip is to give a firm reply. I'll give you an example. If someone gives you an advice that you think doesn't make sense, or you are certain does not make sense or will not do any good to you and your baby, you can firmly say, "Oh, I'm sorry, my doctor does not approve of this advice." Most persons will not argue if they hear that the advice is from your doctor, because that's someone who definitely knows what they're talking about. You can also say, "I'm sorry, this does not work for me and my baby." At the end of the day, this reminds them that it's your baby and it's your prerogative to decide what works well for you. It's your prerogative to make the mistakes as well. So this particular tip is important. Finally, explain to them. Some of these persons, like I say, genuinely want to help, and they do not understand that what they are saying, maybe it doesn't follow scientific reasoning, or it will not do your baby good. So if you explain to them that, "Oh, ma, I'm sorry, I have confirmed this information, and this is why I've decided not to do this. But what works for my baby may not work for your baby. What works for your baby might not work for my baby." If they hear some of these things, some of them will genuinely understand by the time you are finished explaining to them. What unsolicited advice have you gotten about your baby? And how did you manage the experience? I'm excited to hear about your experience in the comment section below. I know that in this part of the world where we live, there are a lot of advisor Nwamagbe. I'm sure very few people know who an advisor Nwamagbe is. But if you know who an advisor Nwamagbe is, you can certainly relate that we have a lot of such people in this environment. Thank you for watching this video.